Okay, everyone, we're about to get started. Thank you for coming, but never arriving. Welcome to the Abstract organization's event on the event horizon of the communist horizon, where we gaze into the abyss from the point of no return to explore the use of complexity words to discombobulate the meaninglessness crisis in order to recapitulate the socioeconomic problems of yesteryear so that we can resolve what we already knew and forgot. This is part of our series on thought maxing, status mogging, and goon washing. I'm your host, Brent Cooper, and today we're joined by Brent Cooper. Shalom. A leading light in a new constellation of emerging think tankers and do-gooders, transforming transformational leadership and universalizing cosmopolitan vigilance in a time of military-industrial state terror, gaslighting, and cry-bullying. I think it was Sir Isaac Newton John who said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of clients." Let's hope this leads to some more. He holds a bachelor pad degree in intranational relationalism from the University of British Columbia and a master's in sociological political calculus from the London School of Reconomics. He's an expert in ontoepistemic profundication, contemplation resonance, spiral trinamics, permacultural Marxism, transcontinental railroading, metacognitive autoprophylaxis, cunning linguistics, and solving the male horniness epidemic through scaffolding wealthy masculinity, or as he calls it, mengineering. He's a reconstruction worker, inquisiting fellow at the Institute for Practical Perspectivalism, and his detractors call him a firebrand, an anti-Semite, and mentally ill. He's known for such fruitful aphorisms as "I don't sense-make, I make sensors," and "seeing eye to eye makes the whole world cross-eyed." Please welcome Brent Cooper. Metabolizing the Meta-Crisis, an evening of serious conversation about everything. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me. In a rare move of radical transparency, it looks like we'll be interviewing ourselves. Well, somebody's got to do it. It might as well be you and me. It's important to model epistemic humility by managing both sides of the conversation. Well, you know what they say, if you want something done right, you got to do it yourself. And I just want to name how brave it is for you to show up like this. Thank you. That's the first move, actually. What's the first move? What's that? To sanctify the guest before they speak. It makes the audience feel safe to stop thinking. Or, hear me out, it creates a safe container. Yes, a container that keeps a lid on accountability. Well, we don't want to spill the beans. Aren't you being a little cynical? It's not cynical. It's cyclical. That's why it keeps happening. Granted, too much accountability can restrict our ability to account for other things. We don't want to indict people for a few bad takes or downplaying each other's liabilities. That's cancel culture. We want to keep rewarding people for their performativity because eventually that might accumulate into key performance indicators, KPIs in the biz. Can't argue with that. You're great at what you do, by the way, whatever it is. That's why you're there and I'm here. Oh, well, thank you. Let me return the party favor. You're often called a genius in these spaces, these meta-liminal, integrational spaces. I prefer the term generative intellectual. It's less effective. Hey, let's not forget vibes and mood here. That matters just as much, if not more. Emotions cloud judgment, so it's better to be robotic and calm about everything while pontificating about complexity and justice from a privileged position. That's the consensus, isn't it? I think you mean status quo. Consensus takes effort. Brilliant. Who inspires you in the marketplace of ideas? As you know, my mentor was Kenneth J. Wilberforce, who sadly passed gas recently. But lately I've been realizing that he was weak on the upper lower right quadratic equation of the emergent perplexity index. And so it may be time to transcend and conclude. To come to a conclusion. Yes, to conclusively come, climactically. The French called it la petite mort, the little death. So we have to let little parts of ourselves die in order to regeneratively be reborn. I'm talking about ego death, of course, or as the wafflers call it, ego death. Kind of scary though, right? We have a huge civilizational problem with death denial. Right, but the irony is that way less people would actually die if they would just die metaphorically. Weird how some of the people who hate identity politics are so tightly wound up in their own self-image and funding streams. What are pearls even for, if not for clutching? Am I right? The meta-crisis. Define it for those who have adopted vague and convoluted versions of it that actually obscure the true workings. The muddle crisis is the sum total of all crises all over the world, both natural and man-made, and how they are connected and compounded by externalities, bad actors extracting and profiteering off resources and exploitation, as well as our misguided and captured efforts to solve such problems. And this sort of discourse has been evolving for a long time, right? Decades, going back at least to the 70s. Yes, and that's what makes it so frustrating today. It's like we're on a giant mouse wheel while the problems and symptoms just get worse. There's a recognition of systemic problems, but that's often coupled with a denial of their root causes and resistance to their obvious solutions. Some would argue that the meta-crisis isn't meant to be solved, just survived until we reach a new societal equilibrium, a new renaissance, a new plateau, as it were, that's perpetually coming soon. We don't have the luxury of that kind of time, unfortunately. Rather than just research and write about it, I went ahead and built the platform to automate solving it while creating roles and opportunities for people to learn and participate. It shows how everything is connected and how we can begin to disentangle wicked and thorny problems. If you'll direct your attention to the screen, we have a little preview. This actually maps what many others just talk around, and it provides the interface for applied meta theory. Oh, that's very cool. Is that, forgive me for asking, is that not just more abstraction though? How does this actually help us? This is intended to actually bridge to the real world, not just simulate it. And what type of users and collaborators do you want to attract to the platform? Anyone seriously committed to solving global problems. We can't count on elites and technocrats to do the right thing. Can anyone solve the meta-crisis? Could a person or people, say, who have tendencies that are transphobic, Zionist, anti-critical race theory, anti-left, anti-political, contrarian, pseudo-intellectual, reactionary, isolationist, denialist, believes in UFOs, and who has none of their thin skin in the game, could they solve the meta-crisis? Or even diagnose it for that matter? No, it sounds like they are just another layer of the meta-crisis. And I've covered this extensively before, and there's more to say, but look, we need to get serious. Everyone has a role to play. But we do a disservice by papering over pathologies to shoehorn in low-grade, high theory where the reality on the ground says otherwise. I've advocated baselines, both policy and personal guardrails, like practice what you preach, foreground contradictions and conflicts, resolve paradoxes, and collectively commit our lives to converging on actual paradigm shift. First principle, do no harm. Second principle, you are what you eat. The meta-crisis. If we don't metabolize it, it will metabolize us. That's right. Groucho Marx called this metabolic grift. It's when pseudo-intellectuals monetize mystifying knowledge gaps and fetishize grandiose, highfalutin commentary, thereby profiting off exacerbating the meta-crisis, all while selling you the feeling of having metabolized it. Can you unpack that like you just got back from a long business trip? The grift is that they don't resolve the gap, they maintain it, or maybe very slowly, incrementally, move us through it. They keep you right at the edge of understanding, not enough to act and not enough to quit. Just enough to nod along. I can see everybody nodding along. So, misunderstanding is overdetermined by competitive incentives rather than collaborative imperatives actually fostering understanding. That's right. I cannot overstate the amount of underlaboring necessary to get ahead of the systemic risks accelerating behind us. You're talking about the so-called liminal web. Yes, the shadow of the liminal web, the flimsy, flimflam, liminal failings of meta-muddled discourse. If we don't converge, then the wrong things will emerge. This is what I call paradigm drift. So you think we can solve the meta-crisis? Oh, it's already solved in the future. We just need to stop propagating it. As my meat guru, Peter B. Jordanson says, clean your Roomba and wash your penis, or the woke brigade will do it for you. What do you mean by that? As intellectuals, we have a responsibility to critique the hell out of each other, or else we have no right or ability to speak on meaning or tackle this meta-crisis. Touché. Boy, you're really giving me a run for my money, which is none because I don't get paid for this, while others do it for doing worse. It seems to be a big problem in public discourse, these chattering classes, which I think the liminal web are desperate to join and influence peddle. Yes, the smattering class, if you will, of liminal Pop-Tarts want to go mainstream faster than a speeding mullet at a NASCAR rally. And do you think they should slow down? They must. Maybe pump the brakes, be open to criticism, actually debate or have discourse around these meta issues themselves. Not only must they, I think they should commit to the direction I and others are pointing, lest they go nowhere fast. There was a guy, what was his name? Always talking about circling, which is ironic for a square, isn't it? Circling the drain is exactly what all these meta-integral liminal sense maxing communities have been doing for years, all while the world tears itself apart. I call it squaring the circle jerk. Let's keep this PG. There could be children watching. Oh, I hope there is. We've got to radicalize the youth and protect them from the pedos. Absolutely. And so how do we do that? By supporting movements, opposing the status quo, and identifying bad actors among us before their names are disclosed in large data dumps. That's something you've been doing for the past decade, isn't it? Yes, very unsuccessfully, I might add. It turns out power is very hard to prosecute. Speaking of pedos who won't be prosecuted, Jeffrey Epstein and his networks are constantly in the news cycle. Any thoughts on optimizing human traffic flow management? This brings up an interesting anecdote. I once went undercover and met one of the most evil mustache-twirling Sith Lords. I won't say who, but I was trying to get funding for my project, the Center for Civilizing Thinking About Thinking. I was partially hypnotized by his beautiful blue eyes, a hallmark of Ashkenazi DNA, but I found myself deeply disturbed at his worldview. It was too elitist, even for me. I'm a man of the sheeple, and this guy was a wolf, let me tell you. A wolf of Ball Street, you might say. Ooh, good one. That's when I came up with this idea of superpower goodness optimization to counteract the evil competitive power dynamics. So not might is right, but it's fight or flight or enlightenment. Ooh, that's insightful. I call it incitement. We can choose lightness over darkness by authentically synergizing our collective intelligence to preemptively entrain ourselves to feedback, to inoculate each other to the game theoretical pressures to capitulate to the forces of the dark renaissance. You almost went full gobsmacked there. Some of the audience aren't as hyper-intelligent as you and me. Can you simplify it a little bit? Don't get played by the game. Gamify the play. And don't just survive the critique. Seek it out in advance. Like a vaccine. Oh, some people aren't going to like that. You know the expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink? Well, I've always said you can lead a man to knowledge, but you can't make him think. So you just trust everything the government says? Oh, absolutely not. No, we know they're mostly grossly incompetent grifters at the highest levels that lie to the public regularly. But they tell the truth sometimes. They have to, or they wouldn't be legitimate. And the public can get things wrong that are true. This is called a type 1 error. As for the pandemic, Bayesian analysis leads to a high probability that the people already propagating disinformation will tend to spread more when the opportunity intersects with conditions of distrust and ambiguity. You know, a culture that is seeded with conspiracy theories already is going to be prone to a disinformation cycle and us just endlessly fighting over that. Riff on that, but in a liminal way, so you sound thoughtful and pretentious. Those averse to the jab are prone to jabberwocky. Sounds paradoxical. Indeed it is, and who's to say who's right? Trust is at an all-time low. Perfect time to build consensus, as your research indicates. Tell that to my detractors. One of your areas of expertise is this systemic conspiracy, though, trying to thread the needle between conspiracy theory, itself a contrived term of derision, and the way the world actually works. So there are conspiracies. Yes, but we're often baited with enough disinformation to never land on the truth. Steve Bannon's flooding the zone strategy, and it's very effective. It's difficult to prove conspiracies when the algorithms and logic of social organization are predicated on not actually destabilizing the conspiracy, even if a lot of the facts are disclosed. We see a lot of this, whether it's financial fraud, war profiteering, sex scandals, lobbying, pollution, drug trafficking, culture war, assassinations, grifting. People are just working the system, working within the system. They don't have to be connected to each other at all. They can be acts perpetrated by a single individual or a small group. Right. Most banal conspiracies operate through tacit collusion, the mutual understanding of common interest. And that leads to and structures various types of white-collar crimes that then have an incentive to be covered up. Especially the higher up you go, right, where everyone is friends with each other and Jeffrey Epstein. So that really complicates things, doesn't it? Indubitably. What is the relationship between truth and power and secrecy? My good friend Derek Eric Weinstein, coined this term, the distributed idea suppression complex of uncomfortable speech, DISCUS for short, to explain how his exotic ideas are not foregrounded enough in his New York Times profile written by a prominent Zionist. To be fair, Derek thinks this is a problem far-ranging that includes suppression of a wide range of people, even Bernie Sanders, which is weird because the whole brand of Feinsteinberg's intellectual dork web was to suppress leftist discourse while managing money for a literal vampire Nazi. But I digress. This journalist who did this IDW feature, she's also very much making headlines today, isn't she? Literally, yes. Barry Weiss, a former New York Times crime syndicate columnist, New York Times, New York Times syndicated columnist, now head of Hasbara over at CBS CBS News, CBS Fake News. That's a lot of Freudian slips. Just to clarify, the problem is not Jews, is it? Oh, no. Of course not. No. We take Jewish conspiracy theories and anti-Semitism very seriously here. Most of my favorite intellectuals, comedians, musicians, lawyers, and bankers are in fact anti-Zionist Jews. Many Jewish people would disagree with you. Oh, I know. I brought a list. Oy vey, I don't think that's such a great idea right now. Well, I'm on their watch lists. And by the way, my list of anti-Zionist Jews is longer, from Marx to Rosa Luxemburg to Albert Einstein, Hannah Arendt, Tony Cliff, Noam Chomsky, Epstein though, Judith Butler, Avi Shlaim, Ilan Pape, Gabor Mate, Naomi Klein, Sam Cedar, Michael Brooks, Katie Halper, Zach Foster. The kid's got chutzpah. What can I say, folks? And those are just some of the political ones. Right? Oh, chutzpah. Norman Finkelstein wrote a book called Beyond Chutzpah, and it's one of the first books that woke me up to this problem. That book actually foregrounds so much of today's contrived intellectual conflict. And he's been fighting this his whole life. He's Jewish. His family was killed in the Holocaust, Woke you up to the problem. The Jewish problem? No, the Jewish answer. What's that? Secularism. Karl Marx spelled this out 182 years ago. It was his answer to the Jewish question. Secularism enables religious freedom, like Judaism, by keeping it separate from politics. And this was half a century before Zionism was even created. I see. So the Jewish question gets weaponized despite being already answered. Now you're getting it. Weaponized even against other Jews. So no two-state bullshit, one secular state. The Jewish question answers itself for those willing to listen. Many, if not most, Jews opposed Zionism from the beginning. And Herzl even had an opponent advocating for cultural Zionism over political Zionism. Achad Ha'am. Gesundheit. That's his name. Wind it back to your friend Eric Weinstein and the intellectual dork Webers. Do they listen? No, they have large platforms where they talk a lot. So it's really the anti-Zionist voices, whether Jewish or otherwise, mostly being suppressed. And in a very systemic top-down way, too, right? Correct. From the ADL to APAC, Meta, TikTok, they're all in overdrive now, calling everything anti-Semitic as a way to discredit legitimate critique. This is well established, and we need to be transparent about that. And you personally have a lot of experience with being suppressed, don't you? Can't imagine why. I try not to make a big deal about it, but yes, I've been ignored, insulted, deflected, gaslit, ostracized, blacklisted, defamed, obstructed, and memory holed. But it's fine. It's fine. It's not like it's the central pathology of the Meta-Crisis or anything. My work and my praxis has been co-opted, misrepresented, and bypassed, but I've made peace with it. This is just how it goes when you're a critical revolutionary. I'd rather be Jesus than Judas, Well, he was a socialist after all. Are you saying your detractors are like Judas then? Actually, not really, because Judas later felt remorse. As Jesus said, verbatim, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do or who they are. They're just liberal ciphers of enlightened centrism, prevaricating from the sidelines for money like the Greek sophists, and are doomed to repeat history." Word for word. Or, if you want an example from real life, it's like Socrates being condemned to death by a jury of his peers. I guess I can roll with that just to prove a point. But now things are changing, perhaps. I mean, here we are. You're being interviewed. We're doing a little prestige and status laundering right now. Maybe the world is ready for more integrational truisms and, God willing, critical interventions. That's a good point, Brent. I think people are sick of things getting worse because they voted for it. So they're slowly coming to the realization that both our abstractions are failing us and we are failing our abstractions. This gets to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? Your work on abstraction is the key to it all. You can get ripped abs just by thinking and doing correctly, right? By tracting the abs, abstraction in action. That's right. I teach abstraction as virtuous and systemic cognition, but firstly as something that precedes us. So what I do is flip the script, or rather you script the flip. Precisely. Meaning, abstraction is a material, social, physical, and then mental process in that order. And that is demonstrated in basic sociological analysis and George Ritzer's quadrant framework, which Wilberforce pirated and then his culture parroted. Arg! Let me come back to this question of suppression because, nobody's stopping you from speaking, right? We're on stage right now. You have access to social media. What is really the issue at stake here? Because I think what it comes down to is a lot of people believe in the so-called marketplace of ideas, and you don't. You think that's a myth. Only stopping me from being heard by the people who need to hear it. Maybe after this, you can go on Joe Rogan, like our friend Nathaniel Schnickerbacher. Well, that's really the pinnacle of the fliminal. You know you've made it when you get there, and then you just do the same old routine and fool yourself that Joe's understanding or listening to any of it. Okay, real talk then. Let's talk politics. Something this meta-milieu network never does, or if they do, they're incredibly bad at it. There's this expression, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. That's our socio-political problem at scale. 90% of people are right-handed, but why? Why can't we be politically ambidextrous? Money. Bingo. Was his name-o. The same people who say we need to go beyond left and right politics also, to some extent, recognize the need to get money out of politics. But they can't acknowledge where all the money is when they're saying both sides are the problem. But you yourself, as a political sociologist, would admit that both major political parties in the US are captured by the same interests. Oh, absolutely, but this is in the context of there being three sides, not two. All sides matter. No, they don't. They really don't. That's precisely the point. You can't integrate fascism, although liberalism tries its darndest. What we need is for people to learn what socialism and communism actually mean and what the potential is, both as a system and as a living and embodied practice. Nobody would demonize the words society or community, right? And yet we're prevented from studying and enacting those very things. The boot of authority kicks those ideas to the curb before they've even been allowed to speak. This is why so many leftists have been murdered throughout history. When socialists and communists try to make a pact with liberalism, they're often weakened and the machine is strengthened. And yet we need liberalism because that is where the majority are. That is where people are at, and those are the baselines of various types of rights and freedoms. So this secret third thing, what is it? I just said explicitly, weren't you listening? I have selective hearing. You'll have to forgive me. What do we got to do? Shout it from the rooftops? Come on. That might help, but it also might upset the apple cart before the horse has had any. Well, they say don't look a gift horse in the mouth, but I did, and I'd do it again. How do you like them apples? Is this related to applied meta-theoretical practicing? Yes and no. While there's no direct etymological link between apples and application, we can certainly pretend that there is for the sake of sincere ironic performativity, because it makes us look and feel smart, which is a prerequisite for applicable ideation monetization. So the left and right-handed thing. It makes me think of the brain hemispheres, and specifically the beloved neuroscientistic philosopher Sir Leon McGillicrusty and his theory of how Western culture is dominated by the left brain. That's ironic. And that's why, according to him, everyone is infected with the woke mind virus. Yes, it's super tragic. Tragic that it's true or that he believes it. I'll let the audience infer that one. Would you say he's a holistic thinker? Well, that's certainly what his big brain thinks. So McGillicrusty believes the right brain, the creative side where context and nuance resides, should be the master in charge. That sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? Does he seem like a creative, contextual, nuanced guy to you, bellyaching about the downfall of Western civilization due to wokeness? He argues the woke are rigid and dogmatic, which is a pretty dogmatic position, wouldn't you say? Does he have any citations to this effect? Debates? Nope, just gushy podcast circuits to reinforce his reifications. Right, and we've seen this kind of thing before with the intellectual doofus web, a centrist reactionary force of galaxy brains who refuse any kind of pushback or accountability for their bigoted views, which the left thoroughly debunked even as it emerged. But McGillicrusty seems to have dodged inclusion in all that and is still being promoted while banging the same anti-woke drum 8 years after the IDW. That's right. The IDW, as it were, was one big pseudo-intellectual misdirect. A psyop, whether it was intentional or just opportunistic. I was on the front lines of that churlish skirmish, and yet they got rewarded and promoted for their heterodox dogmatism. Right, and if I remember correctly, you debated Craig Blandricos about Steven Pinker, among other things. You won, of course, though he'd never admit it, naturally. There seems to be a very strong widespread affinity among white male boomers for cognitive tinkerers like Pinker, Jonathan Haidt, Richard Dawkins, Peter B. Jordan Peterson, Paul Bloom, Ron Zernacki, and so on. Finally, we arrive at the whitewashing of McGillicrusty. Yes, it's incredibly annoying because I believed for a long time, rooted in research, that the field of psychology is somewhat terminal, meaning it's broken, it's outdated, it's reached diminishing returns, and it's high time to get sociological and for psychology and sociology to meet and to cross-pollinate. If McGillicrusty took one of my classes on class consciousness, he'd understand consciousness in social and historical contexts instead of blaming activists for his own stodginess. In your work, you often write about how anti- and pseudo-intellectualism are widespread, even among intellectual communities. That's your thesis. One of them, yes. Case in point, the Templeton Foundation put out a piece last year about profound nonsense. It was warning against fake depth and profundity. It's great to see that. That's part of the problem. The tragic irony is that Templeton gave an organization $234,799 for a program to essentially stifle intellectual courage and avoid debating under the guise of better listening, no less. Templeton's own mandates of funding big, bold ideas is structurally adjacent to the same rhetorical styles they are warning about in that article, and yet they're funding it. We see a similar thing with outlets like Big Think, for example, that seems very open-minded and progressive on the surface, but they sneak in there, the odd anti-left talking point or reactionary, notion because Peter Thiel was one of the original founders. Granted, the non-debate bait thing is not exactly woo-woo. It's more like blue chew for intellectual goon-maxing. But this methodology and the organization as a whole is certainly guilty of the very cognitive closure that it's trying to guard against. I just want to let that breathe for a second. Take it in. What wants to erupt right now? The fault lines, both geologic and epistemic, are always fracturing. We have a few choices on how to deal with it. We can complain about it, we can ignore it, or we can try to harness the energy coming through the cracks. We can continue to treat these things through the lenses of mythopoetics, or we can use science and empathy to take responsibility for our politics and channel those eruptions into movement. This has got to be exhausting and demoralizing, being ahead of the curve all the time. As my comrades over at Current Affairs say, the left has always been right too early. Timing is everything, isn't it? Yes, and the meta-irony is the irony doesn't stop there. You know, there was a CBC comedy video from 10 years ago that mocked thought leadership and parodied TEDx-style talks. And yet we see that kind of thing all over the place still, the same tropes committed. I call it tropic blunder. Oh, that's punny. Our short-term historical windows are very repetitive because so many refuse to learn from our mistakes. That we are prone to do this becomes their thesis, that our feigned attempts at our best is enough, instead of embracing the protocols of change. I don't want to throw us off track, but I wanted to take a moment to check in. How are you Jewing? I'm Jewing great, but I'm just a regular goy, nothing special. It's a tough time to be a goy in this world, but I'm a card-carrying member of Jews and Druze Against Genocidal News, and they've welcomed me with open arms deals because it's easier to look away from the spectacle than speak out against injustice. Speaking truth to power gets you into trouble, doesn't it? I've been getting better at it, at verbal judo, if you will, to make sure I don't say the wrong thing. You're saying Jew a lot. Are you implying there's an all-powerful Jewish cabal ruling the world? No. Let me be clear. There's an all-powerful capitalist Christofascist conspiracy orchestrated by a handful of Jews, Jewish supremacists. So what's the link? Zionism, of course. Political Zionism. Indeed. Well, let's zoom out again. The Meta-Crisis. Between anthropogenic climate change, ongoing acts of genocide, suspicious forest fires in Argentina, and Jewish space lasers. That's a Spaceballs reference, by the way, don't cancel me. Is it getting hot in here, or is it just me? Well, you know what I always say, when the world is burning, gather around the campfire and roast some marshmallows. But seriously, we've got to turn down the thermostat on this culture war. And the way to do that is to stoically shuffle people into yet another pseudo-intellectual discourse so that they can manage their symptoms just long enough to get to the next crisis. Speaking of roasting, you participated in a roast, haven't you? With Dom DeMark. Yes, 2 years ago we roasted Anaximander Lard. It was good fun. It's about time these self-serious groups poked fun at themselves. It was very cathartic to finally be given the space to mock his terrible ideas in public, even though it had no measurable impact whatsoever. And then they roasted Tim Butt last year. He's like the John Madden of perplexity theory. Yeah, I wasn't invited to that one. I tried to get in, but I guess it's because I'd already roasted him 5 years prior against his will. And some of the other roasters thought maybe I was too hot to handle, that I would overcook everybody. Can't imagine why they would think that. You and Tim Butt patched that up, didn't you? Oh yeah, we're two comrades in a convertible, me and Tim. We just agreed not to talk about what he's wrong about. Seems to be the standard playbook they all operate by. Is he still running that legitimation laundromat down on the corner of Fanta Way and Zorro Road? Well, of course. I call it the pedigree mill. I was on it one time. Nobody listened. And this year, Dom invited you to be roasted, didn't he? Yes, actually, I would have been quite honored to be roasted by a German Zionist. Kind of ironic. I didn't think I had enough name recognition. I'm so humble. But I agreed I would do it on the condition that some of my detractors actually show up. I guess they were too busy peer reviewing each other's mediocrity. Speaking of, it was recently announced that Jethro E. Smartin, the director of the Californication Headquarters for Understanding Dimensional Symbolism, or CHUDS for short, resigned in disgrace for his affiliation with Jeffrey Epstein. Yes, it was very unfortunate and demoralizing to lose such a gifted integrational leadership expert to the woke mobsters. I knew Jethro transpersonally, a kind of mentor-mentee relationship. And as he was leaving the campus, he turned to me one last time, and he held up a roll of Mentos in the thumbs up position, just like that. I could almost hear the jingle in my head. In that moment, I felt the world well up inside me, and a single tear ran down my face. And then, by the grace of God, I achieved a second tear. Mentos, the fresh maker. Tonight's event is brought to you by Mentos, making ideas fresh again. At least before Smartin resigned, he gifted us with over 226 ways to feel smart. And now that that's happened, we don't have to talk about it. We can just memory hole it and plaster over. Transcend and exclude, right? Oh, precisely. Metatrans hyper-ultra philosophy is about the metaphysical meat on the bones, not the skeletons in the closet. Bring it home for us. How do you stay so calm amidst all this chaos? I like to call it game being. By bypassing the overstimulating vectors of game A late capitalist ontology, we can neutralize the destabilizing effects. That, and I take a shitload of stimulants I invented to treat my ADHD. And how does that help you integrate conflict and criticism? The instant that I get mildly uncomfortable, I remove the source of the perturbation in my field of consciousness by blocking anyone who criticizes me. And that seems to be an effective strategy to focus on what matters, which is what I decide should be operant in my prefrontal vortex. My colleague Ron Zernacki calls it mattered manifestation. I manifest what matters. And so I find by talking around the issue endlessly, I can hold people's attention longer and generate more popularity for my friends and I. Circling back to perturbations, a related problem is when we can't always come up with exact solutions to complex problems. So I use perturbation theory to reverse engineer approximate solutions to similar problems. I call it salient solutioning. Those are certainly some words and ideas. I learned from the best. And when in doubt, we just don't talk about any of this. Don't debate, don't critique. Just bury your head in the sand while you meditate on your next Substack article. Sounds about white. As our colleague Sarah Stein-Lubrano says in her book, don't talk about politics. We have to just focus on the relationships and let the change emerge. We tried that, didn't we? Well, we're running out of time here, but we need to come together without, coming together, if you know what I mean. Zernacki calls it a cult without cult dynamics. Okay, it's time for the Blightning round, where I ask you very sublime questions and you answer in pithy profundities. Would you say the meta-crisis is more of a shadow issue or a darkness issue? Where the shadow is cast depends on where you position the light and the grant money. How do we hold this without collapsing into either certainty or responsibility? Easy, you just keep hedging your bets, talking over others as praxis, and gatekeeping as quality control, and let the floor completely collapse beneath us. What's the deepest version of what you're pointing to? The Overton window is basically just the compression algorithm for moral imagination versus political capture. What would it look like if we held this gently without collapsing into certainty? We need to be careful not to let nuance become the velvet glove of non-commitment. Before we define it, can we feel the shape of it? We're in a coordination crisis, disguised as a meaning crisis, disguised as a content strategy. What would you say to someone who misunderstands you in good faith? What's upstream here is the incentive topology of what counts as reasonable in a conversation. Can you name the meta thing underneath the thing? The thing we're calling the problem is mostly the interface through which the problem maintains legibility. Say something very smart sounding. The paperclip maximizer is a thought experiment, like farting into a balloon is a fraught experiment. We're at the end now. Last question. What's next for you? I'm working on a book series that no one will read and participating at a month-long online conference in March, a meeting of the minds called Glimma Convent. It's going to be back-to-back Zoom rooms until your back aches and your head spins, and we're all going to hold hands and breathe. It's going to be electric. We're just coming up to the end, and if anybody would like the full unedited 7-hour version of this, subscribe to our Patreon. That was a very stimulating, serious conversation about everything. My sippy cup does not runneth over, because it can't. Thank you, Brent Cooper, and thank you to the audience for paying attention. In the spirit of you are what you eat, there is a cheese and cracker reception out in the foyer. Help yourself, and it's kosher. And until next time, point being, abstract.